My name is Maya Collins. I am 30 years old and I live in Savannah, Georgia, where I design invisible coastal preservation for elite estates. For 4 years, I had not had dinner with my parents in the same room. Not once. So, when they finally agreed to visit, I spent a week setting the table for four, waiting for presents that never arrived. At 11:51 p.m. on their last night, my mother finally texted, "Maybe next time, sweetie." Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I sat in the blue glow of my phone, the maybe next time text still burning on the screen like an insult I was expected to swallow. I scrolled past the notification, and that is when I saw it. My sister, Kayla, had just posted a series of stories. My parents were there, standing in the meticulously preserved rose garden of the Davenport estate, a project I had spent 8 months of my life designing. They were laughing, holding crystal flutes of vintage champagne, and wearing the gold VIP lanyards I had pulled strings to get for them. They were 30 minutes away, celebrating at a gala I built, while the dinner I'd cooked for them turned to grease on my counter. I had declined my own invitation to the podium that night. I told the Davenport committee I had a more important engagement, a family dinner. I chose them over my own professional triumph, only to watch them use my triumph to celebrate my absence. The lie was as atmospheric as the Savannah fog. 2 hours ago, my mother Elizabeth told me they were too exhausted to move. Now, I was watching them toast to a life I provided. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the familiar sting of rejection. Instead, I felt a sudden clinical clarity. My father, Jeffrey, a former contractor, always told me that if a beam is rotten, you don't paint over it, you cut it out. I looked at my dining table, the 50-year-old scotch I'd bought for him, the imported linen napkins, the untouched porcelain. I realized then that I was the foundation of their lives, and they were merely the residents who forgot to pay rent. It was 11:54 p.m. when I opened my laptop. My heart wasn't racing. It was steady, like a heart monitor after the patient has passed. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a liquidation. I had been the silent investor in their version of family for too long, and it was time to pull my capital. By 12:0 to 3 a.m., the audit was complete. I started with the automatic mortgage transfer for their house, $2,400, canceled. Then I moved to my mother's prescription account. I removed my card and sent a brief automated notification to the pharmacy that the primary payer had changed. I didn't stop there. I went into the portal for my father's car insurance, a temporary contribution I'd been making for 3 years, discontinued. I logged into the billing site for Kayla's kids' after school program, the one they forgot to budget for every single month. I sent a polite email to the administrator stating that future billing should be directed to the parent on file. Click by click, I was returning the weight of their own lives to them. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and tonight the bank was closed. I closed the lid of my laptop, and the silence in my townhouse changed. It was no longer heavy with expectation, it was light. They wanted to live as if I were invisible? Fine. I would make my money as invisible as my presence had been to them. I walked into the kitchen and began clearing the table. I wasn't clearing away a dinner, I was clearing away a bad investment. Inside, my screen glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. The morning light in Savannah filtered through the Spanish moss outside my window, but I wasn't looking at the scenery. I was looking at something much uglier on my monitor. I spent the early hours building a master spreadsheet of every emergency I had solved for my family over the last 5 years. I didn't stop until every wire transfer, every loan, and every paid bill was accounted for. The final total was $114,650. I sat back, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my eyes. It wasn't just a number, it was the price of my disappearance. I realized then that I was suffering from the competence penalty. In my family, my success wasn't a reason for them to be proud, it was a reason for them to stop caring. Because I was capable, because I didn't screw up or demand their energy, I became an invisible foundation. They didn't think I needed a seat at the table because they thought I owned the restaurant. They forgot that even the owner needs to be fed. I was the daughter they didn't have to worry about, which apparently meant I was the daughter they didn't have to love. While my sister, Kayla, was celebrated for her influencer lifestyle, a lifestyle built on the back of my bank account, I was the utility that kept their lights on. I used my spare key, the one I kept in case of emergencies that never happened to enter the house I was still paying for, but no longer felt welcome in. I wasn't there to confront them. I was there to find the truth they had buried in their filing cabinet. Then I found the paper trail that turned my blood to ice. For 3 years, I had been sending my parents $2,400 a month to help them cover their mortgage. I never paid the bank directly. I wanted them to keep their dignity, to be the ones who actually hit the pay button every month so they could still feel like the masters of their own home. I thought I was protecting their pride, but I was only making it easier for them to redirect my heart. My father, Jeffrey, had claimed his consulting contracts had dried up, and my mother, Elizabeth, cried about the fear of losing their home. But when I used my professional credentials to pull the recent renovation permits from my parents' address, the truth stared back at me in high definition. The money I'd been sending to save their house hadn't gone to a mortgage at all. The house had been paid off for years. Instead, my parents had been funneling every single cent of that $114,000 into a gift for Kayla. I was literally paying for the custom marble countertops and high end appliances in the kitchen Kayla was currently using to host my parents for their family vacation. I wasn't just the bank, I was a ghost, funding a life I was too crowded to be a part of. The rot wasn't just in the beams, it was in the hearts of the people I had been trying to protect. I saved the spreadsheet as liquidation audit and felt a strange, cold peace. The project was over. It was time to demolish the site. The silence of my Savannah townhouse was short lived. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the digital assault began. My phone vibrated so hard against the marble kitchen island that it sounded like a warning siren. Jeffrey, Elizabeth, Kayla. The calls were back to back, a frantic rhythm of panic disguised as concern. I didn't answer. I sat with my coffee, watching the notifications stack up like a pile of overdue bills. Then came the text. My mother, Elizabeth, wrote, Maya, there must be a mistake with the bank. The mortgage payment didn't clear. Your father is very stressed. Seconds later, my sister Kayla sent a message that made me grip my mug. Are you serious right now? The daycare just called. You're really going to let your nieces stay in the lobby over a petty dinner? Stop being a drama queen and fix this. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a shred of regret, but there was only clarity. I wasn't being a drama queen, I was being an accountant. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and the bank was now officially bankrupt. I made the mistake of opening Instagram. I wanted to see if the exhaustion they'd claimed the night before had magically cured itself. It had. Kayla was on Instagram Live, holding a glass of wine, in that kitchen I'd unknowingly paid for. In the background, I could see my mother laughing while showing my nieces how to make a lemon pie, the same pie I'd baked for them days ago that sat untouched in my trash can. They were soaking up every last minute, just like the caption said. This was the ghosting of the living. It is a specific kind of agony, seeing the people who share your blood treat your life like a background set. I was watching a high-definition broadcast of the family I had always wanted, existing in a house I had funded, while I was deleted from the frame. I was the silent partner who provided the capital, the lighting, and the stage, but I wasn't allowed a single line of dialogue. The pain wasn't that they were 30 minutes away. The pain was that they were living a reality I had bought for them, and they were doing it as if I didn't exist. I had been footing the bill for a reality show I wasn't even cast in. My mother's next voicemail was different. The sweetness was gone, replaced by the sharp edge of manipulation. You're acting heartless, Maya. After everything we did to raise you, we struggled so you could have that big career, and now you're using it to punish us? We're family. Family doesn't do this. I looked at the liquidation audit on my screen. Family doesn't funnel $114,650 into a secret renovation while claiming they are on the verge of homelessness, either. Their version of family was a subscription service, and they were just shocked that I'd finally hit unsubscribe. I set my phone face down and went back to my professional architectural software. I had coastal estates to preserve real foundations that actually appreciated the support. I contacted Jasmine. She was more than a friend. She was a specialist in property law and a woman who understood that in the world of high-end real estate, a handshake is only as good as the contract behind it. She was also my longtime corporate attorney, the one who protects my architectural designs from copyright sharks. Now, she was going to protect me from my own blood. I didn't call her to vent or to cry about my sister's new kitchen. I called her to initiate a professional extraction. I need a formal audit of 5 years of financial transfers, I said, my voice sounding like the snap of a dry twig. I sent her the liquidation audit file and the renovation permits I had pulled from my parents' address. The numbers on the screen were undeniable: $114,650. Maya, this is staggering, Jasmine said after a few minutes of silence. If they represented these funds as mortgage assistance while the house was already clear, we aren't just talking about a family squabble. We're talking about the intentional misappropriation of funds. I didn't flinch at her assessment. In my line of work, I specialize in coastal preservation. I know that if you don't reinforce the seawall, the tide will eventually take the entire house. My family was the tide, and I had been the wall that was finally crumbling. This was the beginning of my strategic detachment. I understood now that boundaries are not an act of aggression, they are an act of self-preservation. However, I also knew that, to people like Jeffrey and Elizabeth, any limit on their access to my life would be framed as a betrayal. This is a common psychological trap. The person setting the boundary is labeled the villain by the people who are benefiting from the lack of one. They didn't want a daughter, they wanted a guarantor. And they were about to find out that my legal counsel was far less forgiving than my heart had been. Jasmine drafted a formal notice of intent to recover misappropriated funds that same afternoon. It was a cold, clinical document that stripped away the sweetie and honey of their manipulation. It gave them 30 days to. But the real blow was the immediate freeze on the accounts. I wasn't just taking back a house, I was turning off the life support for their lies. I also had her draft a cease and desist order regarding any further contact that wasn't through her office. I was applying the logic of my trade to my personal life. I was cutting away the rot to see if any of the original structure was worth saving. My phone buzzed one last time before I blocked their numbers and funneled everything through Jasmine. It was a message from my father. You're acting like we're strangers, Maya. We're your parents. Think about the legacy. I looked out at the Savannah River, the water dark and deep. The only legacy they had left me was a bill for a life I wasn't allowed to lead. I didn't feel like a stranger. I felt like a sovereign architect who had finally finished the blueprints for her own freedom. The audit didn't just find greed, it found a felony. Jasmine called me into her office, her face, the color of the weathered limestone I use for coastal seawalls, hard and unyielding. She laid out a stack of documents on the dark mahogany desk, each one a brick in the wall they had built around my life. The light in the room was sharp, clinical, reflecting off the plastic sleeves of the legal files. Maya, she said, her voice dropping to a register reserved for the most serious litigation. We found the secondary loan applications for the kitchen renovation. I leaned in, my architect's eye immediately catching the discrepancy on the page. There, at the bottom of a loan agreement for $38,000, was my name. My signature. To anyone else, it would have looked perfect. But I spent my days drafting plans with tenth of an inch precision. I saw the tremor in the M. I saw that the ye lacked the sharp architectural slash I had used on every blueprint since I was 20. It was a beautiful imitation, but it was a forgery. They took out a bridge loan in your name, Jasmine explained, her finger tapping the fraudulent line. They used your verified income from the monthly assistance as proof of ability to pay. It was submitted 5 months ago. Kayla exploited the fact that you'd helped them with their taxes last year. She had your social security number and access to an old recovery email you hadn't checked in years. She used a high-speed fintech lending app that only required electronic signatures and digital verification. To the bank, it looked like a legitimate request from a high-earning professional. To Kayla, it was just a few clicks to steal your future. 5 months ago, I had sent my mother a designer scarf and a handwritten note apologizing for being too busy with the Davenport project to visit. While I was drowning in guilt for my own success, my sister Kayla was sitting at our parents' kitchen table, practicing my signature so she could buy a professional grade range and a sub-zero refrigerator. I'd ignored the credit ping on my phone weeks ago, assuming it was a glitch from the Davenport billing or a routine business inquiry. I was too busy building dreams for others to realize my own sister was dismantling my financial foundation. The realization didn't break my heart, it cleared my vision. This was a signature of betrayal. It wasn't just that they had spent my money, it was that they had stolen my name to facilitate their theft. They hadn't just used the bank, they had hijacked my life and were driving it into a legal wall. They were counting on my independence to mean I would never look closely enough to see the crime. This isn't a civil matter anymore, Maya, Jasmine said, her eyes meeting mine with a lethal focus. This is identity theft and bank fraud. If we present this to the lender, the bank will be required to involve the authorities. Your sister won't just be losing her renovation, she will be facing a felony charge that could land her in prison for years. I stared at the forged ink on the paper. For my entire life, I had been the preservationist, trying to shore up the crumbling structure of my family. I had been the one providing the support beams while they lived in the rooms above, laughing at my expense. But you cannot preserve a building that is built on a sinkhole. I realized then that my parents weren't just poor financial managers, they were accomplices. They had facilitated this. They had watched Kayla forge my name while I was paying for the electricity in their home. Do it, I said. The words felt like a finalized blueprint, cold and ready for execution. Initiate the fraud report. Send it to the bank's legal department tonight. There was no hesitation. No internal debate about the sanctity of blood. They had traded my loyalty for custom marble countertops and a new kitchen island. It was time for the final inspection. The structural integrity of our family had hit zero, and it was finally my job to mark the entire site for demolition. They didn't come to my home when the table was set, but they found their way to my office the moment the bank's fraud department contacted them. I was sitting in my glass-walled office overlooking the Savannah skyline when my assistant buzzed through. My parents were in the lobby. They didn't have an appointment. In the world of high-end architecture, people without appointments don't get past the front desk. But I signaled for her to let them in. I wanted them to see exactly what they had been ignoring for 5 years. I wanted them to see the scale of my success while they stood in the middle of it. Elizabeth looked smaller, her face puffy from what I assumed were hours of tactical crying. Jeffrey stood behind her, his shoulders slumped, no longer the confident contractor who told me how to fix beams. They didn't look like parents. They looked like defendants. My mother whispered my name, reaching for my hand across my drafting table. I pulled back, picking up a silver fountain pen instead. I didn't need the contact. I needed the distance. The bank called the police, Maya, my father said, his voice cracking. They are talking about a felony, identity theft. They visited Kayla this morning. She is hysterical. You have to tell them it was a mistake. You have to tell them you authorized that $38,000 loan. I looked at him, then at the meticulously rendered landscape plan spread out before me. I specialize in preservation, Dad, I said, my voice as level as a horizon line. But you cannot preserve a forgery. You cannot authorize a lie that was told 5 months ago. She's your sister, my mother sobbed, the sound echoing off the hard, modern surfaces of the room. She was just trying to build a beautiful home. She didn't mean to hurt you. If you do not drop this, she will lose everything. Her career, her reputation, her freedom. How can you be so heartless? It was the same word she had used in the voicemail. Heartless. It is the label given to the person who finally stops allowing themselves to be consumed. I did not argue. I did not remind them of the untouched pot roast or the $62,000 in mortgage help that bought Kayla's marble floors. Instead, I slid a heavy black folder across the desk. It was the final audit. In this folder is a civil settlement, I said. It outlines a repayment schedule for the $114,650 you funneled into that kitchen. It also includes a legally binding no-contact agreement. My father opened the folder, his hands trembling as he saw the numbers. We do not have this kind of money, Maya. You know that. I stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. Then you will have to sell the kitchen, or the house. It is not my job to manage your insolvency anymore. My mother gasped, looking at me as if she were seeing a stranger. You are really doing this? You are choosing money over your own blood? No, Mom, I said, walking to the door and holding it open. I am choosing the truth over a forgery. You had 6 nights to be my family, you chose a gala and a baseball game. Now, I am choosing my own foundation. My assistant will see you out. As they walked past me, Jeffrey tried to speak, but I simply looked at my watch. Safe flight tomorrow, I said. The project was closed. The audit was final. I returned to my townhouse that evening and did something I had not done in 5 years. I walked past the dining table without looking at it. I did not check for dust. I did not adjust the chairs. I simply walked into my garden, sat on the weathered stone bench, and listened to the savannah night. The silence was no longer heavy with the weight of who was missing. It was sacred. The audit was complete, the demolition was over, and I was standing on ground that was finally, truly mine. In the months that followed, the consequences of their choices arrived with the same clinical precision I had applied to my blueprints. My parents were forced to sell their home to avoid the civil suit and begin repaying the $114,650 they had diverted. Kayla took a plea bargain probation and a permanent mark on her record for the forgery. None of them were destroyed, but for the first time, they were responsible for the structure of their own lives. I was no longer the invisible beam holding up a house that refused to house me. I was recently featured in a national architectural journal. They didn't write about the daughter who paid the bills. They wrote about the artist who understood that true preservation starts with the foundation. I realized then that my victory wasn't in the repayment of the money or the legal win. The victory was in the realization that family is not a blood-bound contract of endless sacrifice. It is a relationship built on mutual respect. And if that respect isn't there, you are allowed to walk away and build your own home. Looking back, I see now that I was caught in the trap of being the strong child. I've come to realize that when people call you independent, they are often giving themselves permission to stop showing up for you. We are taught that loyalty is a virtue, but kindness without boundaries is just self-destruction disguised as duty. If you find yourself sitting at a table you meticulously set for people who are always too busy to come, I want you to know that it is okay to blow out the candles. You do not owe your life to people who only see you as a resource. Forgiveness is a choice, but access is a privilege, and you are the only one with the keys to your own peace. I spent 30 years auditioning for the role of a daughter, but I finally found happiness when I accepted the role of myself. The most beautiful thing you can ever preserve is your own dignity. If you've ever been the bank for a family that didn't have space for your heart, share this story. If you see yourself in my journey, remember, kindness without boundaries is simply self-destruction in the name of virtue. Will you choose to keep your doors open, or is it time to change the locks? Let me know in the comments below.